The cold night air wrapped around the city like a blanket, and the faint hum of the hospital's generators echoed through the empty streets. Outside the gates of Mercy General Hospital, a small, scruffy puppy sat quietly, his fur matted and his eyes glistening with an unspoken sadness. He wasn't like the other stray dogs that roamed the area, barking at passers-by or digging through trash cans. This puppy was different. Every night, like clockwork, he would appear at the hospital gates, curl up on the pavement, and fall asleep. No one knew where he came from or why he chose this spot, but his presence had become a strange, comforting constant for the hospital staff. Nurse Amina was the first to notice him. She had been working the night shift for months, and every evening, as she stepped out for her break, she would see the little dog sitting there, his head resting on his paws, staring at the hospital doors as if waiting for someone. At first, she thought he was just another stray looking for food, but when she offered him a piece of her sandwich, he barely sniffed it before turning his gaze back to the doors. It was as if he wasn't there for the food, he was there for something else, something deeper. One night, as the rain poured down in sheets, Nurse Amina couldn't bear to leave the puppy outside. She grabbed an old towel from the supply closet and approached him cautiously. "Hey, little one," she whispered, kneeling down. The puppy looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and exhaustion. She draped the towel over him, shielding him from the rain. But when she tried to coax him inside, he refused to move. It was almost as if he was guarding the hospital, waiting for someone who might never come back. The mystery of the puppy spread through the hospital like wildfire. The security guards started leaving bowls of water and food for him, and the janitors would often pause to scratch his ears during their rounds. But no matter how much kindness he received, the puppy never strayed far from his spot outside the gates. He was a silent sentinel, a tiny guardian with a story no one could understand. Dr. Arman, a young and dedicated physician, first heard about the puppy during a late-night coffee break. "You've seen him, right?" Nurse Amina asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "The little dog that sleeps outside every night? I wonder why he's always here." Dr. Arman shrugged, sipping his coffee. "Maybe he's just looking for shelter," he said, though something about the puppy's story nagged at him. There was a sadness in the way people described the dog, a sense of longing that mirrored the emotions he often saw in his patients. As the days turned into weeks, Dr. Arman found himself glancing out the window more often, his eyes searching for the little dog. One night, after a particularly grueling shift, he decided to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, the cold air biting at his skin. The puppy was there, as always, curled up in his usual spot. Dr. Arman approached him slowly, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. The puppy lifted his head, his eyes meeting the doctor's. In that moment, Dr. Arman felt a strange connection, as if the puppy was trying to tell him something. But what? Little did Dr. Arman know, this was just the beginning of a story that would change his life forever. The puppy wasn't just a stray, he was a symbol of love, loyalty, and a bond that transcended even death. And as the doctor would soon discover, the truth behind the puppy's nightly vigil was more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined.
Chapter 2: The Doctor's Curiosity. The hospital was a place of constant motion, a symphony of beeping machines, hurried footsteps, and whispered conversations. But for Dr. Arman, the world seemed to pause every time he thought about the little puppy outside. There was something about the dog's unwavering presence that tugged at his heart, a mystery he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a feeling, a pull he couldn't explain. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the hospital's fluorescent lights flickered to life, Dr. Arman found himself standing by the window of the staff lounge, staring at the spot where the puppy always slept. The little dog was there again, his small frame silhouetted against the glow of the street lamp. He wasn't sleeping this time. Instead, he sat upright, his ears perked and his gaze fixed on the hospital doors as if expecting someone to walk through them at any moment. "Still here, huh?" Dr. Arman muttered to himself, his breath fogging up the glass. He had seen countless patients come and go, their stories etched into the walls of the hospital. But this puppy, this silent, loyal creature, had a story of his own, one that no one seemed to know. The next day, Dr. Arman decided to dig deeper. During his lunch break, he approached Nurse Amina, who was flipping through patient files at the nurse's station. "Hey, Amina," he began, leaning against the counter. "That puppy outside, have you noticed anything unusual about him?" Amina looked up, her eyebrows raised. "Unusual? Besides the fact that he's here every single night, rain or shine?" "Not really. Why do you ask?" Dr. Arman shrugged, trying to sound casual. "I don't know, it's just strange, isn't it? Most strays would move on after a while, but this one, he's different. It's like he's waiting for something, or someone." Amina nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. I've tried to get him to come inside, but he won't budge. It's almost like he's guarding the place." The word guarding stuck with Dr. Arman. What could a little puppy be guarding, and why here, of all places? Determined to find answers, he decided to observe the dog more closely. That night, after his shift ended, he grabbed his coat and headed outside. The air was crisp, and the streets were quiet except for the occasional hum of a passing car. The puppy was in his usual spot, but this time, he wasn't alone. A young boy, no older than 10, was crouched beside him, gently stroking his fur. Dr. Arman paused, watching the scene unfold. The boy was whispering something to the puppy, his voice soft and soothing. "Hey there," Dr. Arman called out, approaching slowly so as not to startle them. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Do you know this dog?" The boy nodded. "Yeah, he's my friend. I see him here every night." "Your friend?" Dr. Arman repeated, crouching down to their level. "Does he have a name?" The boy hesitated for a moment before answering. "I call him Buddy. He used to belong to someone else, though, a kid who was in the hospital." Dr. Arman's heart skipped a beat. "A kid? Do you know who?" The boy shrugged. "I don't know his name, but I heard he was really sick. Buddy used to visit him all the times. Then one day, the kid wasn't here anymore, but Buddy kept coming back." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was heartbreaking. Dr. Arman felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at the puppy, who was now resting his head on the boy's lap. This little dog wasn't just waiting, he was grieving. Over the next few days, Dr. Arman made it a point to visit the puppy every night. Sometimes he would bring food, yet other times just sit with him in silence. He began to notice small details. The way the puppy's ears perked up whenever someone walked through the hospital doors, the way his tail would wag faintly at the sound of a child's laughter. It was as if he was searching for something or someone in every face that passed by. One night, as Dr. Arman sat beside the puppy, he made a decision. He couldn't let this story end in silence. He needed to find out who the puppy was waiting for, no matter how painful the truth might be. Little did he know, the answers he sought would lead him to a story of love, loss, and loyalty that would change the way he saw the world. Chapter 3, The Puppy's Secret. The hospital corridors were quiet, save for the occasional echo of footsteps and the distant beeping of monitors. Dr. Arman sat in his office, staring at the notes he had scribbled over the past few days. The puppy's story was a puzzle, and every clue led to more questions. Who was the boy the puppy was waiting for? And why had he chosen this hospital, of all places, to keep his vigil? Determined to find answers, Dr. Arman decided to start with the hospital records. He knew it was a long shot. Patients came and went, and not every story was documented. But he had to try. He spent hours poring over files, searching for any mention of a young boy who had formed a bond with a stray dog. It wasn't until he stumbled upon an old photograph in the staff lounge that things began to fall into place. The photo was tucked into the corner of a bulletin board, almost hidden among flyers for blood drives and staff meetings. It showed a young boy, no older than 8 or 9, sitting in a hospital bed with a wide grin on his face. Beside him, perched on the edge of the bed, was the puppy, the same puppy who now slept outside the hospital gates every night. Dr. Armin's heart raced as he carefully removed the photo from the board. On the back, someone had written, "Ollie and Buddy, our little ray of sunshine." Ollie. The name echoed in Dr. Armin's mind as he rushed to the nurse's station. "Amina," he called, holding up the photo. "Do you remember this boy?" His name was Ollie. Amina's eyes softened as she took the photo. "Ollie, yes, I remember him. He was such a sweet kid, always smiling even when he was in pain." "What happened to him?" Dr. Ralph Armin asked, though he already feared the answer. Amina sighed, her voice tinged with sadness. "He had cancer. We did everything we could, but he passed away about 6 months ago." The words hit Dr. Armin like a punch to the gut. He looked down at the photo again, at Ollie's bright smile and the puppy's adoring gaze. This was the boy Buddy had been waiting for. This was the bond that had kept the little dog coming back, night after night, hoping against hope that his friend would return. That evening, Dr. Armin went to see Buddy again. The puppy was in his usual spot, his eyes fixed on the hospital doors. Dr. Armin sat down beside him, the photo clutched in his hand. "I get it now, Buddy," he said softly, running a hand over the dog's scruffy fur. "You're waiting for him, aren't you? For Allie." Buddy's ears perked up at the sound of the name, and he turned to look at Dr. Armin, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. It was as if he understood every word. Over the next few days, Dr. Armin began piecing together Allie and Buddy's story. He spoke to nurses, orderlies, and even a few patients who had been in the hospital at the same time as Allie. Each conversation added another layer to the tale, painting a picture of a friendship that had defied all odds. Allie had been admitted to the hospital 6 months ago, his small body racked with the effects of cancer. Despite his illness, he had been a beacon of positivity, always ready with a joke or a smile. One day, during a walk around the hospital grounds, he had found Buddy, a scrawny, abandoned puppy hiding under a bush. From that moment on, the two had been inseparable. Buddy became Allie's constant companion, sneaking into his room whenever he could and curling up at the foot of his bed. The nurses turned a blind eye, knowing how much joy the little dog brought to the boy. Even on Allie's worst days, when the pain was too much to bear, Buddy was there, his warm presence a source of comfort. But then, one day, Ollie was gone. His battle with cancer had come to an end, and the hospital felt emptier without his laughter. Buddy, however, didn't understand. He kept coming back, night after night, waiting for his friend to return. As Dr. Armin listened to these stories, he felt a profound sense of loss. Not just for Ollie, but for Buddy, who had loved so deeply and lost so much. He knew he couldn't bring Ollie back, but he could honor the bond between the boy and his dog. One evening, as the sun set and the hospital lights flickered on, Dr. Armin sat beside Buddy and made a promise. "I don't know if you can understand me," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "but I'm not going to let you wait alone anymore. You're not just Allie's dog, you're part of this hospital now, and we're going to take care of you." Buddy looked up at him, his tail giving a faint wag as if he understood. And in that moment, Dr. Armin felt a connection, not just to the puppy, but to the memory of a little boy who had taught him the true meaning of love and loyalty. The hospital garden was a sanctuary, a small patch of green amidst the sterile white walls and fluorescent lights. It was here on a sunny afternoon 6 months ago that Allie first met Buddy. Ollie had been feeling particularly weak that day. The chemotherapy had left him exhausted, and the walls of his room felt like they were closing in. His mother, seeing the sadness in his eyes, had suggested they take a walk. Just a short one, she said, brushing a hand over his bald head. "Some fresh air will do you good." Allie had nodded, too tired to argue. He leaned on his mother as they made their way to the garden, his small frame dwarfed by the ivy pole he dragged alongside him. The sunlight felt warm on his skin, and for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. That's when he heard it, a soft whimper coming from under a bush. Allie stopped, his curiosity piqued. "Mom, do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His mother frowned, listening. "I don't hear anything, sweetheart. Maybe it's just the wind." But Allie was sure he had heard something. He let go of his mother's hand and crouched down, peering under the bush. There, huddled in the shadows, was a tiny, trembling puppy. His fur was matted and his ribs were visible beneath his skin, but his eyes, big and brown, were filled with a quiet resilience. "Mom, look!" Allie exclaimed, his fatigue forgotten. "It's a puppy!" His mother knelt beside him, her eyes widening in surprise. "Oh my goodness, poor thing must be lost." Allie reached out a hand, his movements slow and gentle. "Hey there, little guy," he whispered. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The puppy hesitated for a moment before inching forward, his nose twitching as he sniffed Ali's fingers. Then, as if sensing the boy's kindness, he crawled out from under the bush and into Ali's lap. From that moment on, Ali and Buddy were inseparable. The nurses, charmed by the puppy's presence and the joy he brought to Ali, turned a blind eye as Buddy snuck into Ali's room every night. He would curl up at the foot of Ali's bed, his warm body a comforting weight against Ali's feet. Buddy became Ali's confidant, his playmate, and his source of strength. On the days when the pain was too much to bear, Ali would bury his face in Buddy's fur and let the tears flow. The puppy never judged, never complained. He simply stayed by Ali's side, his steady presence a reminder that Ali wasn't alone. One evening as the sun set and the hospital grew quiet, Ali sat on his bed with Buddy in his lap. He had been feeling particularly low that day, the weight of his illness pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. But as he stroked Buddy's fur, he felt a sense of peace. "You're my best friend, Buddy," Ali said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "No matter what happens, I'll always love you." Buddy looked up at him, his tail thumping against the bed. It was as if he understood every word. As the weeks passed, Ali's condition worsened. There were days when he could barely get out of bed, and nights when the pain kept him awake. But through it all, Buddy was there. He would nuzzle Ali's hand, lick his face, and do everything in his power to bring a smile to the boy's face. One day, as Ali lay in bed, too weak to move, he called his mother to his side. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "promise me something." "Anything, sweetheart," his mother replied, tears streaming down her face. "Promise me you'll take care of Buddy," Ali said, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "He's been my best friend, and I don't want him to be alone." His mother nodded, choking back a sob. "I promise, Ali. I'll take care of him." Ali smiled, his hand resting on Buddy's head. "Thank you," he whispered. "I love you, Buddy." Those were the last words Ali spoke. He passed away that night, his hand still resting on Buddy's head. The little puppy stayed by his side until the very end, his loyalty unwavering even in the face of loss. When the nurses came to take Ali away, Buddy refused to leave his side. He followed the gurney to the hospital doors, his eyes filled with confusion and sorrow. And when the doors closed behind Ali for the last time, Buddy sat down, his gaze fixed on the spot where his friend had disappeared. From that day on, Buddy returned to the hospital every night, waiting for Ali to come back. He didn't understand that his friend was gone forever. He only knew that Ali had promised to love him, and he would keep his promise too. Chapter 5: The Heartbreaking Loss. The hospital was never truly silent. Even in the dead of night, there was always the hum of machines, the soft shuffle of nurses' footsteps, and the occasional cry of a newborn in the maternity ward. But for Buddy, the world had gone quiet. It had been a week since Ali's passing, and the little puppy still didn't understand. Every night, he returned to the hospital gates, his tail wagging faintly as he scanned the faces of the people coming and going. He was waiting for Allie, waiting for the boy who had saved him, loved him, and given him a home. But Allie never came. Buddy's confusion turned to sorrow as the days stretched into weeks. He would sit outside the hospital doors, his ears perked and his eyes filled with hope, only to be met with disappointment time and time again. The nurses, who had grown fond of the little dog, tried to comfort him. They brought him food, petted him, and even tried to coax him inside. But Buddy refused to leave his post. He had made a promise, even if he didn't know how to put it into words. One rainy night, as the wind howled and the rain poured down in sheets, Buddy sat shivering outside the hospital gates. His fur was soaked and his body trembled from the cold, but he didn't move. He couldn't. This was where Allie had last been, and if he stayed here long enough, maybe, just maybe, his friend would return. Dr. Armin, who had been keeping a close eye on Buddy, couldn't bear to see the little dog suffer. He grabbed an umbrella and a blanket and hurried outside. "Buddy," he called, his voice soft but urgent. "Come on, boy. You can't stay out here in this weather." Buddy looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. For a moment, it seemed like he might follow Dr. Armin inside. But then he turned his gaze back to the hospital doors, his tail giving a faint wag as if to say, "I have to wait for him." Dr. Armin's heart broke as he knelt beside the puppy. "I know you miss him," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I miss him too, but he's not coming back, Buddy. He's gone." Buddy whined softly as if he understood but couldn't accept it. Dr. Armin wrapped the blanket around the little dog and sat beside him, shielding them both from the rain with the umbrella. For the first time, Buddy allowed himself to lean into the doctor's warmth, his small body trembling with grief. As the days passed, Buddy's routine remained the same. He would spend his days wandering the streets, searching for Allie in every face he saw, and return to the hospital gates at night. But something had changed. He no longer wagged his tail when people approached, and his eyes, once filled with hope, now held a deep, unspoken sadness. The hospital staff did their best to care for him. They left food and water outside, and some even took turns sitting with him during their breaks. But no amount of kindness could fill the void Allie had left behind. Buddy's heart belonged to the boy who had saved him, and nothing could change that. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the hospital lights flickered on, Dr. Armin sat beside Buddy, his thoughts heavy with sorrow. He had lost patients before, but this was different. This wasn't just about Allie, it was about the bond between a boy and his dog, a bond so strong that even death couldn't break it. "I don't know how to help you, Buddy," Dr. Armin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I promise you this, I won't let you wait alone anymore." Buddy looked up at him, his eyes filled with a quiet gratitude. It was as if he understood that while he might never stop waiting for Allie, he didn't have to face his grief alone. And so the little puppy continued his vigil, his loyalty unwavering, even in the face of heartbreak. He didn't know it yet, but his story was far from over. In the days to come, he would inspire a community, touch countless hearts, and remind everyone who met him of the power of love and loyalty. Chapter 6, The Doctor's Discovery. The hospital was alive with its usual bustle, nurses rushing from room to room, patients being wheeled down the hallways, and the constant beeping of monitors. But for Dr. Armin, the noise faded into the background as he sat in his office, staring at the photograph of Allie and Buddy. The boy's smile was radiant, his eyes filled with a joy that seemed to leap off the page, and beside him, Buddy looked up at him with adoration, his tail a blur of motion even in the still image. Dr. Armin had spent days piecing together Allie and Buddy's story. He had spoken to nurses, orderlies, and even Allie's mother, who had tearfully shared memories of her son and his beloved dog. Each conversation added another layer to the tale, painting a picture of a bond so pure and unbreakable that it defied explanation. But it wasn't until he spoke to Mrs. Khan, the hospital's head nurse, that the full weight of the story hit him. Ali was special, Mrs. Khan said, her voice soft with emotion. He had this way of lighting up a room, even on his worst days. And Buddy, well, he was Ali's shadow. Wherever Ali went, Buddy was never far behind. Dr. Arman nodded, his throat tight. But why does Buddy keep coming back? Why here, of all places? Mrs. Khan sighed, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Because this is where he last saw Ali. He doesn't understand that Ali's gone. All he knows is that this is where his friend was, and if he waits long enough, maybe Ali will come back. The words struck Dr. Arman like a blow. He had always known that dogs were loyal, but this was something else entirely. Buddy's love for Ali was so profound that he was willing to wait forever, even if it meant spending his nights alone in the cold. That evening, Dr. Arman went to see Buddy again. The little dog was in his usual spot, his eyes fixed on the hospital doors. Dr. Arman sat down beside him, the photograph clutched in his hand. "I get it now, Buddy," he said softly, his voice trembling. "You're waiting for him, aren't you? For Ali." Buddy's ears perked up at the sound of the name, and he turned to look at Dr. Arman, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. It was as if he understood every word. Dr. Arman felt tears welling up in his eyes as he reached out to stroke Buddy's fur. "You loved him so much, didn't you?" he whispered. "And he loved you too, more than anything." Buddy whined softly, nuzzling Dr. Arman's hand. For the first time, the little dog seemed to relax, as if he sensed that someone finally understood his pain. As Dr. Arman sat there, the weight of Buddy's loyalty pressed down on him. He thought about all the times he had seen the little dog waiting outside, his eyes filled with hope. He thought about Ali, a boy who had faced unimaginable pain with a smile on his face, and he thought about the bond between them, a bond that had transcended even death. In that moment, Dr. Arman made a decision. He couldn't bring Ali back, but he could honor the love and loyalty that Buddy had shown. He could make sure that the little dog was never alone again. "You're not just Ali's dog, Buddy," Dr. Arman said, his voice firm with resolve. "You're part of this hospital now, and we're going to take care of you." Buddy looked up at him, his tail giving a faint wag. It was as if he understood that, while he might never stop waiting for Ali, he didn't have to face his grief alone. The next day, Dr. Arman shared Buddy's story with the hospital staff. He told them about Ali, about the bond between the boy and his dog, and about Buddy's unwavering loyalty. By the end of his speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. From that day on, Buddy became a symbol of love and loyalty for everyone at the hospital. The staff took turns caring for him, ensuring that he always had food, water, and a warm place to sleep. And while Buddy still waited outside the hospital gates every night, he no longer did so alone. Dr. Arman often joined him, sitting beside him in silence as they both remembered the boy who had brought them together. And in those quiet moments, he felt a sense of peace, a reminder that even in the face of loss, love could endure. Bringing him food, sitting beside him, and speaking in a kind, reassuring voice. Buddy didn't fully understand why, but he trusted this man who had shown him so much kindness. "Come on," Dr. Arman said as he stood up and extended his hand. "Let's go for a walk." For a moment, Buddy hesitated, his eyes flickering back to the hospital doors. It was as if he was torn between his old routine and the possibility of something new. But when Dr. Arman took a few steps forward, Buddy followed, his tail wagging faintly. They walked through the hospital courtyard, the fallen autumn leaves crunching softly beneath their feet. Dr. Arman spoke as they walked, his voice calm and soothing. "You know, Buddy, you've been through a lot, but you don't have to carry this burden alone anymore. Ali would want you to be happy, don't you think?" Buddy looked up at him, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. It was as if he knew that Dr. Arman was trying to help him, even if he couldn't comprehend the words fully. As days turned into weeks, Buddy began to adjust to his new routine. Arman made sure to spend time with him every day, taking him on walks, playing with him in the courtyard, or simply sitting beside him in silence. Slowly, the little dog started to heal. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the hospital lights flickered on, Dr. Arman made a decision. He couldn't bear to let Buddy spend another night outside in the cold. It was time to bring him home. "What do you say, Buddy?" Dr. Arman asked, crouching down to meet the little dog's gaze. "How about you come home with me, just for a little while?" Buddy tilted his head slightly, his tail wagging faintly. It was as if he understood that this was a big step, but he trusted Dr. Arman enough to take it. That night, for the first time in months, Buddy slept indoors. Dr. Arman had prepared a cozy bed for him in the corner of his living room, complete with a soft blanket and a few chew toys. At first, Buddy seemed unsure, pacing around the room, sniffing everything cautiously. But eventually, he curled up on the bed, his small body relaxing as he drifted into sleep. Dr. Arman watched from the couch, a sense of peace washing over him. He knew that Buddy would never forget Ali, nor did he want him to. Ali had been an irreplaceable part of Buddy's life, and that bond would always remain. But now, Buddy had a new family, a new home, and a new purpose. Over the next few weeks, Buddy began to thrive. He became more comfortable in his new surroundings, his playful nature returning. He would greet Dr. Arman with excited tail wags every morning, and in the evenings they would go for walks in the park or relax at home together. But even as Buddy embraced his new life, he never forgot his old one. Every now and then, he would sit by the window, staring at the hospital in the distance. It was as if he was reminding himself of the boy who had loved him so deeply, and the silent promise he had made never to forget him. Dr. Arman understood. He would often sit beside Buddy during those moments, resting a gentle hand on the little dog's head. "It's okay to miss him," he would whisper. "I miss him too. But he's always with us, Buddy. Always." And in those quiet moments, Buddy seemed to understand. He would lean into Dr. Arman's touch, his tail wagging faintly, as if to say, "I know." A legacy of love. The hospital courtyard buzzed with life. Children laughed as they played with therapy dogs, their cheerful voices echoing through the crisp autumn air. Nurses and doctors watched with warm smiles, their hearts lifted by the sight of young patients finding joy despite their struggles. At the heart of it all was Buddy. The little dog, once a lonely figure waiting outside the hospital gates, had now become a symbol of hope and healing. Dr. Arman's idea to start a therapy animal program had flourished, and Buddy was its shining star. His gentle nature and unwavering loyalty made him a favorite among the children, who adored his playful antics and comforting presence. Dr. Arman stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching as Buddy chased after a ball thrown by a little girl in a wheelchair. Her laughter rang through the air, a sound so full of joy that, for a moment, the pain and hardship that had brought her here seemed to fade away. "He's really something, isn't he?" Dr. Arman turned to find Mrs. Khan standing beside him, her gaze fixed on Buddy. "He is," Dr. Arman replied, a small smile forming on his lips. "Ali would be proud of him." Mrs. Khan nodded, her expression softening. "Ali would be proud of you too, Dr. Arman. What you've done here, it's incredible. You've turned a story of loss into one of hope." A lump formed in Dr. Arman's throat. He had never intended to create a legacy, but somehow that's exactly what had happened. Buddy's journey had touched the hearts of everyone at the hospital, reminding them that even in the darkest moments, light could still be found. As the days passed, the therapy animal program grew. More dogs were brought in, each trained to provide comfort and companionship to the patients. But Buddy remained the heart of it all. his story a constant reminder of the power of love and loyalty. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the courtyard fell silent, Dr. Armand sat on a bench with Buddy resting beside him. The little dog placed his head on Dr. Armand's lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. "You've come a long way, Buddy," Dr. Armand murmured, running his fingers through the dog's fur. "And I know Allie would be so proud of you. You've touched so many lives, just like you touched his." Buddy gazed up at him, his tail wagging faintly. It was as if he understood the depth of Dr. Armand's words, and in that moment, the bond between them felt stronger than ever. Dr. Armand's thoughts drifted to Allie, the boy who had started it all. He remembered Allie's smile, his laughter, and the deep love he had for Buddy, and he remembered the promise he had made to take care of Buddy and keep Allie's memory alive. "We'll never forget him, Buddy," Dr. Armand whispered. "He'll always be a part of us." Buddy let out a soft whine, nuzzling Dr. Armand's hand. It was as if he was saying, "I know." As the first stars twinkled in the night sky, Dr. Armand and Buddy sat together in peaceful silence, their hearts filled with love and gratitude. The hospital courtyard, once a place of sorrow, had transformed into a space of healing, a testament to the lasting power of love and the legacy of a boy and his dog. And in that quiet moment, Dr. Armand knew that Allie's spirit would live on, not just in Buddy, but in every life they had touched.